If you want someone to do something, you have to make them feel something. The only two things that have been proven to physiologically align humans are good storytelling and music.
What is one thing that kills a story before it ever gets started?
When you choose to leave out the conflict in your personal stories, then you're choosing to leave out someone else's survival guide. AI doesn't know about that really weird season of your marriage. Those things are our currency.
Is that a good story?
We're really busy people who do not create enough time for human connection. And we really do appreciate it when we have it.
What are your thoughts on that?
Very, very valuable. We aren't trying to tell stories and have people say that exact same thing has happened to me. We're trying to tell stories to share our values, even if we have totally different events. And people have been through crazy stuff, Chris.
You ready?
If you want a room to be on the same page, it's through good storytelling. We have to find as fast as we can is what the audience member values most. And I was like, is that a job? Not in a weird way like your uncle who just never stops telling the same story at Thanksgiving. We're not presenting people with 100 numbers and like, wow, your number is shinier than the other guy's numbers. The heartbreaking news I have for everyone is
Welcome back to Differentiated, where we have conversations with amazing people who are building incredible businesses and the stories behind them. Today's episode is about something that makes or breaks any sales pitch, investor meetings, or marketing campaigns: storytelling. Today, we're talking to one of the best in the world at this, Katie Quesada. Katie is a storytelling consultant and corporate trainer who helps businesses craft stories that get remembered. She's worked with companies like Zillow and United Healthcare, helping them to tell stories that actually land. So today, we're breaking it all down. What makes a business story stick? Why do most pitches fail? And how can you start telling stories that actually convert? Let's get into it. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so before we get started, I want to give you the opportunity. Who is Katie Quesada? What are you all about?
Yeah, I'm Katie Quesada. I'm a storytelling consultant, which is a made-up job. So let me tell you, I know it sounds made up because it is. So there's no harm, no foul if you guessed that. But I get to help people and companies tell better stories. All of the work I do is concise and compelling storytelling. So I don't help people write their novels. I'm not doing long form, 3-hour presentations, unless it's a workshop, but I'm not doing these lengthy things. I'm helping people say things less, more meaningfully in a way that is concise and compelling. So that is all the work that I do through keynote speaking, corporate workshops and training, and then a handful of high-level coaching clients who typically want to do keynotes themselves. I help people find stories and the stories that matter and then say them quicker.
I love it. For anybody that knows me and knows what I'm all about, I am absolutely obsessive over story. So I'm really looking forward to unpacking all of that knowledge that's in that brain of yours. And so I want to start with this. A lot of leaders, a lot of sellers think that they can tell a good story, but it's really, really hard for most people. What is one thing that kills a story before it ever gets started?
Oh, yeah, this is a laundry list. Where do I begin? I'm going to start with first, we do not care about your long form origin story. So when you start with, the company was founded in 1974 by a man named Harold Greenway, and he, just truly clients today, that's a nice thing for your website. Put that on a timeline somewhere in the hallways of your offices. Lovely. But in human social storytelling, when you're trying to land a sale, get a client, we don't need to hear about how many years, we don't need to hear that your company's been around for 27 years and 3 months. So the kind of long form origin story is, I think, dying or dead. So that'd be number one. Number two is when right away you try to make yourself the hero of the story instead of making them the hero. You're a storytelling nerd, so you know the way that it works. The whole goal is that we're making the other person the hero of the story. And the way that I see this die fastest is, especially in sales, in corporate conversations, people come in and basically their story is, who's great? Me. And the other person's like, okay, what does that have to do with me? So balancing the hero narrative is, I think, the second way that you kill a story fastest. So drowning them in too much data or context, picking the wrong hero, making it about yourself instead of making it about them, and then just not having a compelling mode of creating that connection. So are you on a phone call? Is your platform for your story just not going to do it? I think people need to see each other to have really good storytelling connections. I think we have the whole world's at our fingertips, right? You can send someone a Loom video. You can send someone a cool TikTok. There's a million different ways to communicate. So I'd say the wrong platform is the third way that you can kill a story really quickly.
So what I love about storytelling is that there's both an art and a science to it. And we're going to break down both of these here in a second. But I love your take on this in particular. Most people pin themselves as logical human beings, but science has showed us that decisions are emotional first and then justified by logic second. In your opinion, how do you get somebody to feel something in a story?
I mean, what you just said speaks to one of the things that I do in all of my trainings, which is if you want someone to do something, you have to make them feel something. So there's no way around that, right? So we're not presenting people with 100 numbers and like, wow, your number is shinier than the other guy's numbers. It doesn't work as effectively anymore. We really do have to make someone feel something. So, I mean, honestly, my connection point would be human connection first, right? Getting to know someone. Where are you from? What's your family like? Oh, I see in your background you have a football helmet. I know nothing about football. Whatever those connection points are for you to talk to somebody and really create that feeling of warmth and care. We're really busy people who do not create enough time for human connection. And we really do appreciate it when we have it. When we leave meeting with someone and we think, I like them. I don't really know why, but I like them. That currency is very, very valuable. Exactly to what you're saying in sales. Like, I think I have had so many return clients in corporate just because we enjoyed working together. There's a million corporate trainers out there, but I think that's why I've come back is because I've made such good connections with them and I genuinely enjoy being around them. So I think balancing human connection and sharing some of your personal stories is how you do that, right? You're going to have to put out some story threads for someone to pick up. Oh, I'm from here. Oh, I like doing this. Oh, do you have this? Oh, I got 2 kids. Oh, me too. It's those little things you have to lay down in your personal story to create that connection.
So I'm really curious to your take on this. I want to stop here for a second. With the rise in AI, ChatGPT can make you more efficient, make you faster, write a script for you, write a story for you. But when it's time to stand up and deliver and present and perform in front of somebody, it all comes down to human connection. Are you ready? Are you prepared? Do you have the communication skills in order to bring somebody into that story, allow them to see a better tomorrow, and engineer some kind of change in the audience? What is your take to how AI is going to influence this even in the next 12 to 24 months?
Do you have 6 hours? I'm just kidding. Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this. I mean, I have so many thoughts about this. I talk about this in most rooms that I'm in. I think it's very important right now to start to mine for the stories that AI does not know about you. So I think I say all the time, AI doesn't know what happened to you in 2nd grade. It doesn't. AI doesn't know about the most meaningful adult in your life. AI doesn't know about that really weird season of your marriage and then you made it through. Like AI doesn't know about those very specific things. And those things are our currency. They are our high level human connected currency. Authenticity, transparency. I open all my workshops with just tell me about a place when you were a kid that you would go to and it made you smile. So everyone shares in the room. Everyone's sharing all these places they went as a kid. And then I just talk about like AI didn't know anyone's answer. No one's like, it's always like, oh, the park to the left of my grandma's house. AI doesn't know that. So thinking through those things, like starting to mine the stories for your own life that AI does not know will create differentiators for you. It will, because everyone is getting the same ChatGPT's prompts. That's the hard news. So it's how you differentiate yourself in all the noise.
So in my world, we talk a lot about features versus outcomes, or outcomes being a transformation of the listener. But first, we have to ground ourselves in what actually matters for the audience that we're talking to, or that transformation doesn't matter whatsoever. What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree, disagree? Would love your take.
What I teach on is that what we have to find as fast as we can is what the audience member values most. So whatever the client values most. So I think that we have to find the story that matches that thing. So for some audience members that, or some clients or whoever, that isn't going to be the transformation story. It's going to actually be just the data set of money you're going to save them. And you got to tell a whole story around that thing because that's what they value most. When you can really unpack their problems, you can figure out values. And in the work that I do, I talk about how micro stories are event-based storytelling. But macro stories are when we can finally move to value-based stories. So we're not just telling stories like, hey, for me, my family sold everything we owned. We moved to an RV. I have a wild life story. But if I told you that story and just said, hey, has anyone else ever lived in less than 200 square feet? No one will say yes, right? No one's like, no, I never want to do that, right? But if I instead said, have you ever had a season of your life where you desired simplicity? Have you ever had a season where you just wanted to get rid of all your junk? I'm connecting it to the value of a person instead of sharing the same event. We aren't trying to tell stories and have people say that exact same thing has happened to me. We're trying to tell stories to share our values, even if we have totally different events. So I would wonder, in your question, in a very roundabout way to answer this, I would wonder instead, what do they value? Do they value transformation? Do they value lack of barriers? Do they value ease of use? Do they value cost? What do they value most? And then how do we tailor narratives to match that?
Okay, now moving into the science behind storytelling. There is actual neuroscience behind why stories work. What is happening in the audience or the listener's brain when somebody else is telling a story?
So many things. I mean, the research that's wild is that if you want someone to remember something, tell them a story. Like our memory centers is where it gets really wild. There's an amazing study out of I think the University of Ohio. They had 100 students in each room. And on a Monday morning, they presented one of the rooms with 7 numbers. And in the other room, they presented the 7 numbers just wrapped up in a story. That's it. And then 1 week later, they pop quizzed them. They didn't tell them they had to memorize it. They just pop quizzed them. In the room that was just given the list of numbers, only 5% of students correctly remembered the 7 numbers. In the room where the students had the exact same numbers, just wrapped in a story, 65% of the students correctly remembered the numbers. So it truly makes our brain remember and connect. And then some of the research that I really love, one of it was from Huberman Lab. Do you listen to the Huberman Lab podcast? Yeah, he's like my husband's very healthy and biohacky. But he is a neuroscientist at Stanford, and he has a clip from one of his episodes that I love that he says the only 2 things that have been proven to physiologically align humans, like literally make our heartbeats beat the same speed, our breathing patterns align, our brain waves align. The only 2 things are good storytelling and music. Which I'm like, of course, that's how you feel at a concert, right? I'm on the exact same page as everyone, at a Coldplay concert. So how we feel, it really does build teams. It really creates culture. If you want a room to be on the same page, right, which is what we're all trying to figure out how to do when we're making a sale or building teams, all of those things, it's through good storytelling. So yeah, there's so much fun science. There's a cool book called The Science of Storytelling. I'll shout that out. Will Storr, The Science of Storytelling. That's a really helpful one. He has a gigantic book on all the things that make it amazing.
I love that. And how do you deploy those learnings in your frameworks or formulas in helping somebody tell a better story?
I do a section on the science in my workshops. And I do that specifically because a lot of my workshops for corporate teams are with people who do not identify as storytellers. And so that is, I have given a storytelling workshop to an entire team of just physicians, just data scientists, just rocket scientists, just bankers, just head of finance. So these minds are looking at me and they're like, okay, Katie, like I am logical, technical, hyper, like all these things. And so the beginning of the workshop really is just me like undoing the narrative that's unfortunate, which is I am or I am not a storyteller. The heartbreaking news I have for everyone is you are telling stories. You just aren't paying attention to them. So that the first hurdle is, oh, it's you. You're a storyteller. The second hurdle is here's why I can prove it. Here's the stories you're telling. Here's the science behind it. And then we get into the how-to.
Yeah, I want to unpack that just a little bit more. For somebody that claims that they're not a natural born storyteller, which there are a lot of them, where does somebody even start to begin gathering stories and building their repository to become a better storyteller?
So you're telling stories every day about how your day was to your spouse, about the work you're doing to your boss, about the work your teams need to do to your teams, about why your company is good or bad, about why you like that one weird lady, whatever those things are, all of us are constantly telling stories. We all are. We humans are narrative creatures. All of humanity up to this point has survived based on oral storytelling. I mean, it is in your DNA. You are a storyteller. Storytelling is not extroversion or introversion. It is not gregarious or not. It is not logical or, it's not any of these other archetypes. We are all storytellers. I mean, Steve Jobs was a fantastic storyteller. And that man was hyper logical, introverted, and data minded. So it is not a connected to a stereotype. So I kind of sit there for a minute to help them think that. And then how do they find them? The second part of your question. The framework that I use is mine, refine, remind. So I first ask you to mine for good stories in your own life. I have a course called Story School, and in that you can find the best stories in your life. So I help you identify your 7 key stories and what the values that they teach you. I do a micro version of it in a workshop, but so you have to mine for them. You have to look back on your life and find some good stories. When did you change? When did you transform? What sucked? When was it hard? And then once you mine for them, you got to refine them. And I would use AI for that. I drop them into ChatGPT and say, make these all better, more concise and compelling, make them human, make this story work for a presentation to a client on sales that makes sense. So I'd incorporate them wherever you can. So you mine for them, you refine them, usually in AI, and then you need to remind people regularly of your best stories. So you have to become a story reteller. Not in a weird way like your uncle who just never stops telling the same story at Thanksgiving. I'm not talking about like that. I'm talking about if you're a leader, you actually should be saying the same things over and over and over again, believe it or not, because our brains just forget. We have to get that muscle built.
Now, I saw that you're doing an event with the Maxwell Group coming up here sometime in March. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And Ryan Leak, I believe, is going to be a presenter.
Yes.
And he has this awesome part of one of his speeches where he talks about a CRO, Chief Revenue Officer. Always talking about, I'm repeating myself over and over and over again. I'm having to tell my people the same thing. They don't get it. Why am I having to repeat myself? And he says, well, you are the CRO. You are not just the Chief Revenue Officer. You are the Chief Repeating Officer. If they don't get it, say it again. That's your job. You have to tell a story. You have to repeat a message over and over and over again in order for it to stick. So I want to give you a quick opportunity. Tell us about the event. It seems really, really cool.
Yeah, it's March 18th, which is my birthday. That's why it was extra fun. Thank you. In Orlando, Florida. It's the High Capacity Leadership Summit with the Maxwell Group, and it is with Tim Tebow, John Maxwell, Ryan Leak, some great names. And it's a 2-day intensive for high capacity leaders. I can send you a link too for the episode if it doesn't air by then, but if it does, then there's many more Maxwell opportunities to join. But yeah, I'll be leading a session on how to find your stories and then how to tell them.
Okay, so I want to shift gears slightly. I want to go into what you think the differences are between social storytelling, business storytelling, and even perhaps Hollywood. Do you think that they all can fall under the same framework and formula, or do you think that there are differences in each?
So I think all of them have the same building blocks, which there's a lot of different viewpoints on what storytelling building blocks are. I teach that the 3 building blocks are the 3 C's, which is context, conflict, and conclusion. That's what I teach on. I think every single story has to have context, it has to have conflict, and it has to have conclusion. That is the simplest way that I can teach that. There are a lot of very good other things out there. They're just very long. There's like a 12,000 page book you could read. Pixar has 22 rules of storytelling, and I'm tired and I have small children. So I just have to make everything as simple as possible. So those are my basic building blocks of storytelling. That's what I teach on. I go through how to balance those 3 C's when you present, when you speak, when you're leading, when you're guiding, how to create that balance. All of us have a strong one and all of us have a weak one. So that's what I teach in my frameworks. But so every, social, business, and Hollywood all have to have those 3 things. But I think obviously production value is a question here. In social storytelling, a great story at a dinner party, right? Like that kind of a home run story. You don't need any production value, and it better be less than 5 minutes, right? And in that setting, you can be the hero of the story. It's a fun story. The goal is connection. In the business storytelling, the hero is never you. You are only ever the guide. So, which and I mean, if you're listening and you've never heard of Donald Miller's story brand or obviously storytelling philosophies, et cetera, there's a lot of theories around that. And then in Hollywood, you just have a lot more time to build a story. You have a lot more production value. You have a lot more space to breathe. You have a lot more character arcs. Whereas in the first 2 categories, we don't got time. Everyone's tired. What do you want? What do you need? What time is your Zoom? I got to go. My kid's sick. So we just don't have the capacity for it.
Okay, so I want to get your take on this. In business storytelling, we always want to anchor on what is versus what could be. And we want to create some sort of tension between the two. And the tension is what our solution is supposed to relieve. But in social storytelling, I would have to imagine that people don't always have that tension. For example, I go to the beach, I'm there with my family, everything went really, really well. There was no tension. Is that a good story? How do you feel about the importance of tension in your stories? Is it a must-have? How do you feel about that?
Fantastic. I love that question. So I would call the tension the conflict. That's the word that I would use as you're saying that. So that's what I teach on, is this idea of conflict. So people who tend to socially not tell any conflict in their storytelling tend to be people pleasers. So they tend to be the kind of person who tells a story like, yeah, I mean, it's fine. It was crazy. It's all good. I mean, no big deal. Like, yeah, he got fired, but it's totally fine. Like, I'm doing great. And you're like, what did that lady just say? You have no idea, like, what is going on? I know you're fine, but what the hell happened? So they leave out the conflict from the story because they're so worried about you feeling worried, right? So they're like, I just don't want you to be stressed, so I won't tell you about that. Whereas my philosophy is that when you choose to leave out the conflict in your personal stories, then you're choosing to leave out someone else's survival guide, which is like so hard, right? You have to actually tell the truth about what happened, about what got really hard, about why it mattered. You have to really sit in that. But the opposite side of that is that some people tell way too much conflict in their storytelling and way too much tension, and they end up being a negative team member. So this is the delicate balance that we're all trying to figure out. Negative team members sound like, well, that's not going to work because 3 years ago, that one thing happened and it's never going to work. And you're like, what is your deal? Right? Like, you didn't even come with a solution, or people who at the end of every single day tell you a bad story about their day. Like, there was traffic. I had to buy eggs. Have you seen how much eggs are? Right? And you're like, are you okay? Because the whole story is negative. So there really is a very delicate balance where the tension brings you in, the conflict makes you curious, the conflict creates a compelling action. You want to keep paying attention. You want to make sure they're going to be okay. But the whole time I'm not like bombed down by all your negativity. So it is delicate balance. You're totally right. But I do think even personal storytelling needs to have tension. You got to add it in. So with exactly what you just said, like, oh, I took my family to the beach. We had a great day. What I would tell you to add in is, what were you originally fearing would happen? So you don't actually have to have something bad happen. You can share what you thought was going to happen. So for you in that exact story, I would say, oh yeah, I took my family to the beach. Honestly, I thought it was going to be really hot, and my kids are really little. So I was like, are they going to be okay by the water? But it was such a great day. We actually had a really wonderful day at the beach, and we had some really good family time. We should all go to the beach more often.
So a lot of people think about story and deploying story for big events, like a keynote, a sales presentation. I need to be able to influence or persuade an audience to do something. Otherwise, maybe not really that big of a deal in my day-to-day life. What do you think about that?
I would ask right back, how and when do you want to make an impact? So I couldn't answer that question for you. If the answer is in your parenting, then that's where you need to tell more stories. If the answer is in your presentations, that's where you need to tell more stories. If the answer is in your culture, in your team leadership, in your sales, in landing the plane, in calls to action. So I would ask that question right back. Where in your life are you desiring to make the highest impact? And then you'll probably find that answer.
Really, really good. Okay. Shifting gears again quickly. You've built a business on the back of storytelling. How did this come about? What was the moment where you realized, like, damn, this is something that I can do full time?
Well, I actually spent all of my 20s in the nonprofit space. And as I was ending that time in the nonprofit space, a tiny part of my job was that people would tell me their life story, which usually takes anywhere from 60 minutes to 3 hours. I mean, a very, very, very long time, depending on how old they are, right? They would tell me their whole life story, and then I would help them say it in 6 minutes or less from a stage. So they would present at these events, and I would coach them behind the scenes. And I accidentally started doing this job, and I loved it. I'm very curious by nature. I actually do want to know your life story, right? Like that is a starting place. Is I really am like, whoa. And people have been through crazy stuff, Chris, right? Like, people are very amazing and have survived and been through very amazing things. So I started off by helping people condense their life story. I quit that job. Our life went awry, and my husband and I sold everything we owned and moved into an RV with our 2-year-old daughter. And when we were living in the RV, one of my friends said, oh, are you going to keep being a story coach? And I was like, is that a job? And she was like, I don't know, maybe. And I was like, oh, I think that is my favorite part of the job I quit. It was only a tiny percent, but that's the part I think I loved the most right now. So I started working with individuals. And then I started to work with some corporate teams and then small businesses, then medium businesses, and then large businesses. And then I landed my first couple great corporate gigs. And then I was like, oh, this is a full company and this can be an ethos I can exist in. And now we're on year 6 and I got to work with brands this year. I do ongoing work with United Healthcare, worked with Zillow, Nike. I mean, such great brands. So yeah, it worked, thankfully.
That's really cool. Where are you seeing the biggest results from these workshops? Is it with their CEOs and leaders? Is it with their sellers and individual contributors? Where are your biggest wins so far?
Number one, when you bring in an outside voice, that voice is allowed to tell a team they're boring. And it's very hard to give internal feedback on communication specifically, but I think I can create a lot of human connection and laugh and giggle and then say, oh, guys, this is bad. This is real bad. And like, oh, yeah, it's bad. We knew it. And I'm like, I know, we all knew it. Everyone knew it, but no one wanted to change it. But they brought me in and then we go, whoa, whoops. And then we redo it. So that is kind of the highest ROI currently is we got to stop being boring. And then the second highest ROI is that I save companies time. We are done spending 20 hours on bad decks. We're done presenting for an hour. Anything you can say in an hour, you can pretty much say in 20 minutes or make it a video. Like we're done. So a lot of it, the ROI in financial value is in time. I mean, I've had teams that cut whole meetings. I've had teams that figure out whole new ways to figure things out and pitch things. And then I have the like ongoing work is a lot of, oh, these high level leaders, we need to create a story bank for them. So they have to figure out what their stories are, why they matter, where they're going to tell them. And their brain just might not think that way. So we also build out story banks is an outcome that they really appreciate. So less boring, story banks, time. And then across large teams, I do virtual presentation skills. So that is a ongoing training that me or my team leads. I have some coaches under me as well who do just virtual presentation skills, sales skills, those kinds of things. How do we just really basic things that are hard when no one's ever taught you, right? How do we sit up and put our head in the right frame and sound clear and those kinds of things?
So you talked about a few of your frameworks and formulas, your 3 C's, mining for stories, refining the stories. But when you get a first-time storyteller or somebody that, again, feels like this doesn't come natural to them, the first thing they want to do is ramble. They have a lot of ideas. They're going crazy. They don't know how to package this up in a way that is, number one, entertaining, number two, transformative, and is going to take somebody from A to B and allow them to see themselves inside of their own story. So where do you start when you're trying to help somebody condense that life story that you said may take 60 minutes to 3 hours? How do you condense that story down into something that matters for the listener?
I don't think there's a perfect formula for that because I think it is outcome dependent. There are a lot of formulas. There's hook, action, conflict, conclusion. There's a lot of different formulas that people tend to use. And I mean, this is a great thing to research if you never have, just like storytelling formulas. There's a bunch of them. But I think that is a little bit specific to the outcome itself. Are you on a stage? Are you landing a sales pitch? What does the audience need to feel is really what I'm wondering. So I'm wondering not just how do you tell your story, I'm wondering what does the audience need to feel at the end of your story? And so that question really creates a different narrative to lend. I mean, a couple of years ago, I kind of had this random client who was my beloved children's pediatrician's daughter. Okay, you with me still? And she's wonderful. And my pediatrician said, my daughter got deferred to med school and we really want to get her in. Can you help her write her cover letter? And so she had already gotten deferred twice or waitlisted. And I got her cover letter in the mail and we Zoomed. And in one session, I just rearranged mostly and then added a lot more drama to the opening hook, which was so good. It just was buried in the middle in this area. And I kind of restructured it and just reformatted it and then talked her through how to like keep attention throughout. And it went great. And she got into med school. So, I mean, like great time that would be so specific to, that environment. I wouldn't put that formula on someone giving a TED talk per se, if that makes sense. So,
okay. Before we wrap, I have 5 rapid fire questions for you. You ready? Number 1, what is the worst storytelling advice that you've ever heard?
Oh my gosh. What is the worst storytelling advice I've ever heard? Take all the time you need. That is only true when you love someone and they're sharing their heart with you, or when someone is experiencing grief. That is when people can take all the time they need. Otherwise, when someone is giving a presentation with data, information, or sales, you should not be using too much of people's times. In fact, I think you should be using under the time you're allotted. So there is a situation where you should say take all the time you need, and that's when you are with someone you love. But other than that, you should stay in time. I've heard incredible storytellers, some of the most incredible storytellers in the world. I have heard them, and when they speak through lunch, the whole room is gone. We're all hungry. It's like, you're the best in the world, but you don't get to skip my lunch. So just those, you can't beat lunch, you can't beat hunger, you can't beat attention spans. So don't even try.
Okay, number 2. One thing that every founder or seller should stop doing in their stories.
Making themselves the hero. I mean, that's easy peasy, but that is, you have to, as quickly as possible, make everything about the other person.
What is a storytelling cliche that drives you crazy?
I don't love far-fetched analogies in sales calls or pitches or keynotes. You know, when you're in a keynote and they're like, there once was an old man. He walked into a bar once upon a time. And I'm like, what is happening? I'd much rather hear that keynote speaker survive a car accident or that thing that happened with their kid. I would so much rather be able to see myself in it than like far off allegories, not algorithms or algorithms, but allegories, fantasy, when you're like when speakers or people presenting say, close your eyes with me and imagine a world where we have aliens. And I'm like, no, I don't think I want to do that right now. So that would be my faux pas.
One book, TED Talk, podcast that is an absolute must read.
Fantastic. I recommend to everybody the TED Talk where this guy says nothing. And I need to know the name of it. I'm going to find it. My assistant sends it after most of my sessions. I need to look it up. But he gives a 12-minute TED Talk or maybe 10 minutes. And in it, he says nothing. He says through his tonality, his pacing, his energy levels, his pointing, his body language, you think he's speaking about the most incredible things you have ever heard. And I have to recommend that to everybody because we put way too much weight on words in storytelling. Whereas over 50% of the story you're telling is not the words. So that is a very important thing for you to remember. You can script the most perfect story in the world, but if you don't learn tonality, pacing, breathing, physical body language, energy, it's not going to work. So that TED Talk is definitely where I tend to land the plane. Maybe I can, my assistant will send you the link and then you can post it in the show notes so that people can watch it because it is totally worth watching. And I did botch the name of it.
And finally, if you had to explain storytelling using only emojis, which of them would you pick?
I'd probably pick like hearts and music notes and a microphone and then a voice talking and then more hearts and then more music notes. It'd be a lot of emojis. It'd tell the whole story through emojis. But you did, Chris, just remind me of something with that question I think is important to share, is that if you want to become a better storyteller, a very great place to start is children's books. So you're connected to that with the emojis. That's how I just jumped the ship to there. But I encourage people all the time to read children's books out loud. And that is some of the greatest practice for good storytelling because children's books are written to encourage tonality, connection, drama, character development. It's going to feel silly, but it's so helpful to become a better storyteller. Like the book with no pictures is such a great example. There's a couple kids books that every time you read them, you really have to up your game and be silly and then incorporate your body and your tonality. And I think that's a really great way for people who are just like, how do I get started tomorrow? You should probably start reading more children's books out loud. If you don't know any kids, just volunteer at a library or find a wonderful kindergarten teacher. She'll let you read.
All right. What's next for Katie Quesada? What are you working on? What are you excited about? What's next?
I do keynote speaking. So I'm speaking at a handful of great events in the next couple of weeks for all different organizations. I do keynote speaking for insurance brokers or finance or SaaS or all different environments. And then I lead corporate workshops. I'm working with some amazing organizations right now, like CrowdStrike. That's a SaaS, right? SaaS. So There's a couple of great brands that I'm connected with that I'm doing on-sites for. So I do corporate training, storytelling 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. And companies tend to just go through the whole flow if they want to sign up for a year of storytelling. And each one of those is a different foundational aspect of how we tell stories to shape culture. And that's kind of our bread and butter is corporate training. And then I do a little bit of individual coaching, and then I have a course anyone can access at any time to do a deep dive called Story School.
And where can they find you? Where can they follow along with your journey?
First and foremost at katiequesada.com, and my last name is Quesada, like quesadilla. So katiequesada.com, and my Instagram is Katie Quesada. It's all very clean. It's all my name. I got in early enough that I landed the URLs across the board.
Well, Katie, this has been incredible. Thank you for joining us, breaking down the art, the science, and the business of storytelling. Thank you for anybody that is still with us, that is still watching to this point. The only way that we can continue to have conversations with incredible people like Katie is if you continue to tune in week after week, like, subscribe, and share this with somebody that needs to hear it. For now, I'm Chris Ford. This is Differentiated. We'll see you next time.